many lands should you actually play in Commander?
I'm your host, Joe Cherries.
I'm your host, BZ, joined by Amber, and that makes us the Nitpicking Nerds. We make videos every single day, and if you'd like to be a critical, play a pivotal role in supporting the channel, you can give us money directly on Patreon, which there's a link in the description for. We love you a lot, and we got to shout out Mers, because they're one of the generous people who make this show even possible.
Remember, becoming a patron makes it so we never have to do an ad for Raid Shadow Legends.
There will never be a Raid Shadow Legends with more patrons.
But an ad we would love to do is IntoTheAM, which we have an affiliate link for. If you'd like to get these awesome swag shirts, use our affiliate link to get 10% off.
Yeah, you're actually saving money, and I know some of you need shirts out there, and these ones are really cool.
Yes, they're amazing. Moxfield.com sponsors this channel. We love Moxfield.com. There's an ad somewhere in this video. Guess where? Right now in the comments. If you get it correct, you cheated.
And you are happy birthday to everyone whose birthday is today.
It's smooth as butter.
Saved it.
Yeah, let's get into this video. It's all about how many lands should you play in your commander deck.
Yeah, there's a lot of disagreement. I don't think any creator is going to agree with any other creator. So this is our take on it, and it's objectively the correct one because we're the best in the world.
Yes, and like you said, there is this between 33 and 40. It seems to be the number that we meet in between. CDH decks can play less than that. And
we're not talking about that yet.
We're not talking about that. We're not CDH experts. You can go low. But there's a lot of things to consider for this because it's not like when someone says, how many lands should I put in my deck? I'll give you a number at the end of this video, but it's not usually just like 40, boom, done,
yeah,
over.
People have said as high as 40 and as low as 33. Mm-hmm. We're going to give you what we think, which isn't really either of those numbers. Two of us, if you don't know, have upgraded and built hundreds of decks each, so we've got a pretty good take on what we can play and what works and what is functional.
Yes, and we also, from building and playing so many different decks, we also have a good feel for what tends to work and feels right in those decks.
Why is it important to know the correct number of lands? Well, there can be a pretty high cost if you're wildly off of what we would consider the correct numbers. If you're playing 5 too few lands, you're going to notice in like a chunk of games where you just get mana screwed. And if you're playing way too many lands, you're going to flood out and not have any late game juice.
And yes, obviously, when you play the quote-unquote perfect amount of lands, this will still happen. There will be flood. There will be games where you get mana screwed. That is just part of the game, but it happens more often when you're off by a lot.
Yeah, we're going to mitigate it, not prevent it. We're going to get to the sweet spot. And like in general, I would say in Commander, just as a thing, missing one land drop is not the end of the world. If it's like your second land drop, you kept a terrible hand, I don't know what you're doing. But if it's like missing your 6th land drop, you don't lose the game for that. So it's not like we have to never miss a land drop or else.
Yes, I think it though you're right about that, 100%. I think that it is vital to not miss 3-4 land drops in a row. That is very vital, no matter what point in the game. Because even if you're in the later turns, like say if you reach turn 5, you had all your land drops. Then the next 4 turns you missed your land drop. That will hurt you.
The later turns, turn 5.
Well, you're starting to get into the later game.
What? It's like the mid game.
Okay, sir. So if in the mid game you start missing your land drops, it can be bad if you miss a bunch in a row.
Yeah, once you're like turn 12, I don't think it really matters too much what you miss or don't miss.
Now, this next part, I think, is the meat of the video. Because like we said, it's not just yes, no, it's not just 36, it's not just 37, it's not that simple. But it's things to consider. Because your deck has a lot of factors that will change how many lands you should play. The first one, and this is the most obvious one, I think most people watching this video know this, average mana value of the deck. This is what your spells cost. If something costs 2 in a red, like a Blood Moon, the mana value of that is 3. So now we average everything together in the deck to come up with our numbers.
Yeah, it's the average spell cost of your deck. If you've got 3.2, it means the average spell in your deck costs 3.2. So it kind of means, boy, do you really want to get to 3.2 mana as fast and as consistently as humanly possible.
Yes, and something I think is super important that me and BZ do on Moxfield, this isn't even the ad, that we do on Moxfield is change things mana value compared to what they actually cost, because it helps you actually see. Because Blasphemous Act in my deck is not a 9-drop, and the fact that not even in that Moxfield just lets me switch it to 1 is so helpful, because now when it averages my mana value, it takes it down.
Yeah, when you are calculating your average mana value, I think this might be one of the reasons people play too many lands if they're using Moxfield. It's like you can take all of these high spells or some spells that basically aren't spells, and you can change them to 0, and it's like, we'll get to that. But that's going to change the actual, tell you what you're actually paying for your spells, not what it looks like you're paying for your spells.
Yeah, exactly. Force of Will.
Treasure Cruise.
These cards do not cost the mana value listed on them. Change them to what they cost usually.
Yes, and then check out your average mana value. The next term, mana hungriness. This is kind of like dependent on certain decks. Some decks don't need to use a lot of mana. They don't need to spend a lot of mana to win the game. But some decks are just like, if they're not constantly throwing crap on the field, they can't last.
Something like an X spell deck is a great example of mana hungriness. When you have all X spells in your deck and that's the focus of what you're trying to do, you're going to use all your mana every turn, meaning you're going to want to play more lands in your deck.
Yeah, the extra land drops, the flooding, if you will, doesn't even really impact you as much as the other decks because you've got something to do with all your mana all the time. I have this 5-color Niv Mizzet deck, and it's like the most mana-hungry deck I've ever played. I think because there's restrictions on it, so the average power level is low. So you just have to keep playing things, and I just never want to miss a land drop ever.
Yeah, and when you do that, you tend to want to push up your numbers of lands. The amount of ramp in your deck also plays a huge role into how many lands you want to play. If you're playing a ton of ways to get lands onto the battlefield already, you can play less lands because you're not reliant on drawing them and playing them every turn.
Yeah, and I'm mostly talking about 2 mana or 3 mana ramp. I wouldn't consider like explosive vegetation too much when I'm talking about how many lands to play because that's more of a higher mana value and you're not going to guaranteed hit land 4 if you take out lands for explosive vegetation. But we're like all the signets, all that stuff, all of the like rampant growth effects, mana dorks, wild growths. I'm looking at those and I'm saying if I have 13 of those, maybe I can trim a few lands.
And this definitely plays a factor because if commander decks weren't playing any ramp, you would easily see 40, 42, 43 lands in decks because you can't miss land drops to that point when the format would play so much differently.
Yeah, you really just don't want to miss out on mana. You want to get ahead on mana, but the ramp sort of changes the numbers and it ends up being the same consistent amount, but you get to play less actual lands.
Yes, amount of card draw. This matters a ton too because if you're going to be going through your deck quickly, yes, you need to hit your land drops up to like 3, but it's like if all your spells after that are going to be cantrip card draw, you're not going to miss land drops now. Even though your deck might have, let's say, 32 lands, a low amount, you're still going to be fine because you can keep finding them and playing them quicker.
Yeah, if a third of your deck is lands, you're going to hit a land every 3 turns. But if you're drawing 2 cards a turn, that just changes all of the math. Like if your commander is like Queen Marchesa, she makes you the Monarch. Or if your commander makes a ton of mana already, it's like there's so many factors, and it's like pay attention to how much card draw you can do on the cheap, not like Urban Evolution. Don't count that.
Yeah, exactly. And also, obviously, this factors in fast mana. If you're playing Soul Ring, Mana Crypt,
Mox Diamond,
Chrome Mox, all of these cards practically take the place of lands. You can almost 1-for-1 them out with land because they are pretty much just lands.
Except for maybe Mox Diamond.
Yeah, I mean, that's true.
That one wants a land.
That one does want a land. But fast mana seriously will make you have to play less lands on average.
Yeah, I don't know a deck on the planet that's playing 40 lands and a bunch of fast mana. I don't think that's going to happen.
That's just not a real deck.
No. You don't need to.
And now it's time for the actual Moxfield ad, because Moxfield.com is the best deck building website on the entire internet. And though I told you some stuff you can do earlier, also you can see your average mana value, which is so important to help you determine how many lands you need in your deck.
Yeah, this is 50% ad, 50% still the video, because the average amount of lands in your opening hand is something Moxfield gives you. And if you're seeing stuff come up like average amount of lands in your opener, 1.9, it's like, can you function on that every game? You're really going to have to be fast or have a special commander for that. So like if you see those kind of numbers and you can draw and playtest opening hands and spin the wheel 10 times and you go, there's 1 land in 6 of these 10 hands. That's when you can go, I don't even have to play this deck. I can already know that I need to add more lands.
Yes, exactly. Moxfield.com, thank you for helping us play the correct amount of lands.
Yeah, and it tells you the percentage chance to hit every spell on curve.
Which is super helpful.
Yes, but how many lands do we play? We got to get to like our numbers, and we did a bunch of math. We did a bunch of number crunching for what we actually play.
So the average amount of lands I play in one of my decks, I currently have 8 together right now, is 37.5. BZ, how about you?
I got 12 decks on Moxfield, and I'm at 35.5, and there's definitely a difference there of 2 lands.
Yes, and one of the main reasons you might see that is on average, my average mana value is 3.36, whereas BZ's is only 3.01.
Yeah, if I'm building a deck, on average, it's going to be definitely more wheel spinny, but it's going to have more cheap cantrippy type stuff. That's just kind of how I like to play, and it's funny that we didn't rehearse this or anything. We just build our decks separately. I don't ask Cherries to build my deck, but it's like this reflects it perfectly, and I just thought that was the best. It's like, hey, we kind of know what we're talking about because this is just what we're practicing what we preach.
We do practice what we preach. Like seriously, like we just build decks separately. Like maybe I asked BZ for input on a couple cards for a deck, but it's like in the end, I'm making all the final choices for my deck. BZ's making all the final choices for his decks, and we just end up coming to it. It's like, hey, we're following what we say, even though we were going to say this regardless. And if we weren't following, it'd be like, hey, we're doing it wrong, but we're doing it right.
Yeah, and then obviously another huge factor, we get to talk about MDFCs. This is like the single biggest factor in how many lands you can play. Those 37.5 for Cherries and 35.5 for me, that's including MDFCs. Cherries, how many MDFCs do you play on average in a deck?
Well, before I give that number, I want to say an MDFC is a modal dual-faced card.
From Zendikar Rising only.
From Zendikar Rising, and we're talking about cards that are lands on the back, and in the front, they're spells. So that's what we're talking about here.
Right, and those are the cards we also list as 0 CMC in a lot of different cases on Moxfield because they don't cost anything. You don't have to cast them. They're lands, maybe half or more of the time.
Yes. So the average amount I play in a deck is 3.125, and that's including a deck that I looked at earlier today that has 0 that I'm going to be adding some in because I didn't realize I was missing all.
Yeah, I play 2.4 on average, and to me, that almost makes me want to play more. That was a little bit lower than I thought, so I'm going to have to look into MDFCs. Maybe I can take out a spell for an MDFC or something.
Something big about the MDFCs that I think might be a reason you play some less is colors matter a lot for MDFCs.
Mm-hmm.
I play a lot of red-green, and red-green has some of the best
That's true.
MDFCs, period. So that's why I get to sometimes play more.
Yes, there's some colors. I think blue is kind of on the weaker end.
Absolutely.
For MDFCs.
Like, terrible.
Yeah.
Like, the blue MDFCs are the worst. Like, obviously the Mythic is one of the best Mythics, but it's like, other than that, blue's like big stinky.
Yeah, blue's not so great for MDFCs, but obviously there's still at least 2 or 3 that are playable out of that. But so the MDFCs just let you play more lands, so you can kind of say the average amount of tangible physical Magic cards that say land on them only, I'm playing, let's see, 33.1, and Cherries is playing 34.4.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like I'm playing like 34 lands with 3 MDFCs. That's what my decks look like.
Yeah, and then I'm like 33 lands with 2 or so MDFCs.
Yes, and I think MDFCs are just, they let you have both, like, lands when you need lands, and when you need spells, it's a spell. They feel so good and they've changed the math on lands for us ever since they've come out. Like,
yeah.
It was more simple, like, to do lands before. Like, now it's a little bit more complex, but your decks are so much better and stronger.
Yeah, you just flood out less, and then you hit land drops more. It's just the absolute best of everything. And another set of lands that actually are basically the same thing, channel lands. They discard for an effect, that's what a spell is, or they're a land, and they come in untapped.
Yeah, exactly. I think the channel lands are auto-includes 100% if you're playing 2 or 1 color.
For sure.
You play your on-color channel lands every single time, and I think as you go into 3 colors, you sometimes might, depending on decks, Takenuma, Adawara, and Boseiju, depending on what deck you're playing, might want to go in. Boseiju probably just goes in every deck. It's so good.
Yeah, but all 5 of them, they're going to have synergies, they're going to have a bunch of upsides, and they're going to be spells when you don't need lands, and it's just amazing.
Yes, they're so good. So let's talk about it. If you got to give a suggestion, somebody comes up to you and says, "These are the Nitpicking Nerds. How many lands should I put in my commander deck?" What are you telling them?
I would say somewhere around 35, and make sure you're playing MDFCs, but not necessarily in addition. So like 35 total. Make sure you have MDFCs, though, in general.
See, I would say play 35 with 3 MDFCs.
Okay.
That would be my go-to. Like, if you need a solid number, play 35 things that are lands with 3 MDFCs.
Okay, and then maybe if your deck is meeting some of the criteria you mentioned above, like amount of ramp, card draw, fast mana, you can shave a few off.
Yes, exactly. And I want to mention one more thing quickly. Deck's average mana value cannot be 100% reflective of what a deck is actually doing. BZ has a Nylea deck, and I have a Henzi deck, where the mana values look silly high. But Henzi is always reducing the mana values of cards in my hand, and Nylea is doing the exact same thing. So make sure you take all of that into consideration. There's more than just looking at the numbers. The numbers can lie to you sometimes.
Yeah, and if for average mana value, I think there's kind of a cutoff point. We say if your deck is average mana value is above like 3.5, we're getting into the range where it's like, it's a little clunkier. So maybe I would be a little more generous with the lands at that point.
Yeah, exactly. As you hit 3.5, and especially as you head towards 4.
4 is like definitely clunky.
Yeah, well, that means you just need to be, you can't miss your land drops. You need to start playing those like 38, 39, 40 lands because your deck is clunky. It's like, you want to play all those clunkers? That's fair. That's fine. Not everyone's aiming to make the deck, as fluid as possible, or
winning
as,
on turn 2.
yeah, and that's not what everyone's aiming for. So when you're playing those big chunky decks, just make sure you don't miss your land drops, because when you miss them, it'll be real bad, because you'll be like 5-drop, 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 and I have 2 lands. Oh no.
Yeah, so if you're looking to shave lands, you got to meet some of the criteria we mentioned above, and some of the criteria is going to say, hey, you need to add some lands. And if you want to know exactly what we think about pretty much every land and every land we'd ever recommend playing, we did a gigantic video, just like the complete guide to lands in Commander, and you can go watch it right now.
Peace out, Tribe Scouts.